The fall that changed everything. Area Sullivan pressed her palm against her fluttering chest as she stood at the boarding gate, trying to steady her breath while the intercom repeated the final announcement for Flight 703 to London. Flying had never scared her until last year, when a storm-ridden flight forced an emergency landing and left her sleeping in airports for 2 days. Since then, turbulence triggered a panic she could barely hide. But this trip wasn't optional, not when everything she had worked for, the refugee education initiative she had spent 4 years building, depended on one final meeting with a global foundation that could change everything for her students. She shifted the strap of her worn backpack, her only travel bag, because she believed money should go to the children, not to luxury. She stepped forward to scan her ticket, her heart racing as she prepared herself for cramped economy seating, crying babies, and the familiar claustrophobia that accompanied long flights. But the gate agent frowned at her ticket, typed something into her computer, then smiled with polite warmth. "Miss Sullivan, you've been upgraded to first class." Aria blinked, stunned for a moment. "Are you sure? I didn't request any upgrade." The agent nodded. "Yes, it happens. Enjoy the flight." Aria stepped down the jetway almost in disbelief, her heart thrumming with surprise. She could barely remember the last time she had experienced comfort, let alone something like this. She entered the luxurious cabin and felt like she had accidentally wandered into the wrong universe. Plush seats reclined like beds, soft amber lights glowed from the ceiling, and attendants drifted through the aisles, offering warm towels and champagne as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Aria placed her backpack under her seat and sat slowly, fingers brushing over the buttery leather as if it might vanish at any second. She tried to calm her nerves, styling herself into some semblance of composure. First class. She had never imagined sitting here. She took a sip of orange juice, the sparkling glass a stark contrast to her trembling hands. She reached for her notebook, filled with lesson plans, grant proposals, and scribbled motivational quotes she used to cheer up her students. The plane hummed with quiet conversation and soft music, a world away from the noisy chaos she was accustomed to. She focused on her breathing, reminding herself why she was doing this. The children needed her. This meeting could unlock funding for their school. Books, software, heating for the winter, everything they were lacking. Just as she turned a page in her notebook, someone slid into the empty aisle seat beside her. The movement drew her attention, and she lifted her eyes and froze. The man beside her was striking in a way that didn't feel real. Sharp cheekbones, broad shoulders outlined by a tailored black suit, hair slightly tousled as though he had run his fingers through it in frustration moments earlier. But it wasn't his looks that held her captive. It was the air around him, a presence, a quiet, commanding gravity. His aura felt like wealth, power, and absolute certainty condensed into human form. His watch gleamed like it cost more than her entire school's yearly budget. She tried not to stare, but he turned slightly, tight and forcing his chorusing baby, sling, slang, slang, into the flat. Didn't guide the stred you hope, and the twist and sing and kying, zed when things that taste to cook, which is often it doth have a masia. He gave a faint, tired smile, shoulders scrunched to your ears. That's usually someone's carrying the weight of the world. She tried to laugh, embarrassed, something like that. But then his gaze softened, lingering just long enough to make her heart skip a beat before he looked away, focusing on the view outside. The plane began taxiing, and Aria's breath grew shallow. Her fingers dug into the armrest, nails indenting the leather. The man noticed instantly, his eyes flicking to her hands before returning to her pale face. "Afraid of flying?" he asked gently. She nodded, hoping he didn't think I was childish. "A bad experience last year," she admitted. "My brain knows it's safe, my body disagrees." His voice lowered, smooth yet reassuring. "I've flown a lot. Turbulence rarely means danger, just the sky reminding us it's alive." The poetic phrasing surprised her, and for a moment she forgot her fear and met his eyes. They were intense, storm gray, fierce, yet kind, like they were always thinking, always calculating something important. The plane lifted smoothly off the ground, but soon encountered light turbulence. Arya gripped her seat harder, her breath coming fast. The man shifted slightly toward her, lowering his voice. "Hey, breathe with me. In slowly, then out." She matched his breaths, the rhythmic cadence grounding her more than she expected. "Better?" he asked. She managed a nod. "Thank you. I didn't expect, well, this." He tilted his head slightly. "What? A stranger helping a stranger?" "A stranger noticing," she corrected quietly. Something flickered in his eyes at that, something unreadable, almost lonely. The turbulence intensified so suddenly that her drink slid off her tray and shattered on the ground. The cabin jolted, and someone gasped behind them. Arya instinctively unbuckled, panic, pure panic, trying to adjust her bag before the plane lurched violently downward for a split second. The force sent her forward, weightless, her notebook flying from her hands. She felt herself launching through the air, and then everything happened at once. Strong arms wrapped around her waist with decisive force. A solid chest caught her impact. Her breath collided with warm fabric and the sharp scent of cedar and something expensive. She wasn't just near him. She was in his lap, entirely. Her hands had landed against his shoulders, her face brushing dangerously close to his jawline. Her heart hammered, her cheeks flooded with heat. Her voice came out as a horrified whisper. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean..." But the plane shook again, and he tightened his hold as though protecting her from the whole sky. His voice dropped to a steady, anchoring command. "Don't move." She froze, not just because of the turbulence, but because of the intensity in his tone, the firmness of his arms, the distance between worlds. When the plane touched down in London, Arya felt her heart sink with the unexpected weight of reality returning, as though the magical, suspended world she and Mason had created in the air had evaporated the moment the wheels kissed the runway. The cabin filled with the rustle of passengers gathering their belongings and the soft chatter of people relieved to be back on solid ground. She unbuckled her seatbelt reluctantly, her fingers brushing against the armrest he had helped steady earlier, a small reminder of how he had held her through chaos, with a gentleness she hadn't expected from someone who radiated authority with every breath he took. Mason stood slowly, stretching his tall frame with a controlled calm that made her wonder how someone could move with such effortless command. He reached into the overhead compartment to retrieve her backpack before she could even attempt to, handing it to her as though it were instinct. "Careful," he murmured, his hand gently brushing hers, just enough to stir something unfamiliar in her chest. They stepped into the aisle, and Arya felt suddenly small under the fluorescent lights, her earlier confidence diluted by the vastness of the airport beyond the jet bridge. As they walked side by side, she tried to cling to the last threads of the strange bond that had formed between them during the flight, but fear tugged at her heart. People who belonged in her world didn't look like him, didn't move like him, didn't command attention merely by existing. When they reached the end of the jetway, Arya felt a shift immediately. People turned. Not subtly, not incidentally. They recognized Mason. There was a faint whisper that rippled through the line of passengers, a whisper tinged with curiosity and something like awe. Someone's phone angled discreetly, trying to snap a picture. Mason noticed instantly and lowered his head just slightly, his hand unconsciously brushing Arya's back as if guiding her forward, protecting her from a world she didn't understand. She looked up at him, confused. "Why are they staring at you?" she asked. Mason's jaw tightened in a way that told her he was used to it, but that didn't mean he liked it. "Ignore it," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But that answer, so smooth, so practiced, only heightened her curiosity. He hadn't told her who he really was. He hadn't even mentioned his last name. There was a reason for that, she realized, and she sensed instinctively that whatever truth lay behind his identity existed in a world far from hers, a world of power, wealth, and complications she couldn't even imagine. They moved through immigration and the baggage hall together, the silence between them a quiet echo of the intimate, honest conversations they had shared in the sky. When they reached the exit where passengers parted ways, Arya felt an unexpected stab of loss.
This, she thought, was the moment life returned to its usual shape, the moment she went back to her reality and he went back to his. She wasn't prepared for how painful that felt. Mason turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it on a man with such commanding presence. "Arya," he said quietly, almost carefully, as if testing how saying her name out loud felt in his mouth. She swallowed hard, willing herself not to show how much this moment affected her. Before she could speak, a group of sharply dressed men in suits appeared out of nowhere, approaching them with swift, purposeful steps. They were the kind of men who carried authority like a weapon, stoic faces, discreet earpieces, posture too rigid to be ordinary travelers. The man in front inclined his head slightly. "Sir, the car is ready." Arya's eyes widened. "Sir?" Mason barely reacted, as if this level of attention was routine. He gave a subtle nod, but then turned his full attention back to her, ignoring the impatient, watchful stares of the men waiting for him. "You should get to your hotel," he said gently. "Do you have transportation?" She nodded quickly, lying without hesitation. "Yes, I already arranged a shuttle." In truth, she had planned to take one of the cheapest trains into the city and walk from there, stretching every pound of her limited budget. Mason studied her face for a moment, long enough that she wondered if he saw through her lie, long enough that her breath caught in her throat. Then something flickered in his eyes, something conflicted, something reluctant. "I meant what I said on the plane," he murmured, "about wanting to know more about you." Her heart stumbled, tripping over itself as she forced a smile. "And I enjoyed talking to you more than I expected." He held her gaze, the gray depths of his eyes swirling with thoughts she couldn't begin to understand. "Arya, One of the suited men cleared his throat. "Sir, we really must." Mason shot him a look sharp enough to silence him instantly, and Arya, for the first time, truly grasped the magnitude of who he was. Men who intimidated everyone else in the airport were intimidated by him. Mason exhaled softly, frustration tightening the line of his jaw. "I have to go," he said reluctantly, as if the words physically pained him. "But—" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek black business card with embossed silver lettering, but before she could read it, he flipped it over and wrote a number on the back. His handwriting was bold, decisive, as though nothing he did ever wavered. He handed her the card, his fingers brushing her palm with deliberate slowness, and his voice lowering to something intimate and unguarded. "Call me. No matter what time, no matter why." Her breath caught. She tried to answer, but the world suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too overwhelming. She managed to whisper, "Okay." He stepped back, his eyes lingering on her long enough to imprint her face into his memory. Then he turned and walked toward the exit with the men surrounding him like shadows, forming a tight, protective formation. Security or bodyguards, she realized. Her chest tightened as she watched him disappear into the sleek black car waiting outside the glass doors. When he was gone, the airport felt strangely empty. Arya took a slow breath, forcing herself to focus on her purpose. She wasn't here for romance. She wasn't here for a man, especially not one with a life so far removed from hers that calling it another world felt like an understatement. She was here to fight for her students. She was here to present her proposal and pray that the foundation saw the potential she saw every day in the children who counted on her. But the moment she stepped outside and the cold London air hit her face, she looked down at the black card still clutched in her hand. The name embossed on it made her freeze. Mason Caldwell. Caldwell Global. The conglomerate that owned half the tech infrastructure in Europe. The company whose CEO's face had been plastered across news articles about billion-dollar acquisitions, government negotiations, and global economic summits. A man whose influence shaped industries. A man whose decisions reverberated across continents. A man often referred to as the most powerful private figure in Europe. And she had fallen into his lap. Her knees felt weak, her breath uneven, her entire body trembling with disbelief. She had spoken to him as though he was just another traveler. She had fallen on him. He had helped her breathe through panic. He had listened to her dreams. None of it made sense. Why had he given her his personal number? Why had he looked at her like she was something rare in a world where he had everything? Why had his voice softened when he said her name? Why had he protected her during turbulence as if she mattered? She forced herself to breathe, grounding her chaotic thoughts. No, she wouldn't allow herself to spiral. She had work to do. Children waiting for her. A meeting that could change lives. She tucked the card carefully into her notebook and headed toward the trains, her mind still replaying every detail of Mason's expression, his touch, his voice. Hours later, after checking into her small-budget hotel and reviewing her presentation for the next morning, Arya sat on the edge of her narrow bed staring at the black business card again. She traced her finger over the raised silver lettering, thinking about his quiet intensity, the contradictions inside him, the commanding presence paired with an unexpected gentleness, the guarded aura of a man used to control paired with fleeting moments of sincerity that hinted at something wounded beneath. She shouldn't call him, not tonight, not when her mind was tangled with uncertainty, not when her heart felt more vulnerable than it had in years. But even as she told herself this, she knew the truth. She didn't belong in his world. But somehow, impossibly, he had stepped into hers, and nothing felt the same.
The weight of dreams and the pull of fate. Arya barely slept, though exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes as dawn crept over the horizon, filling her small hotel room with pale London light. She had spent the night rehearsing her presentation, adjusting slides, refining her speaking points, and attempting to calm the relentless storm inside her chest. The meeting with the foundation meant everything, more than her own comfort, more than her pride, more than any fleeting connection with a man whose world existed galaxies away from hers. She forced herself to focus on her purpose, repeating to herself over and over, "This is for the children. This is for their future. This is for the school that had become her heartbeat." But no amount of determination could erase the memory of Mason's arms around her, the sound of his voice grounding her in the chaos, or the strange, intense softness in his eyes when he had looked at her at the airport. She reminded herself that the moment was over, that her life was too fragile to get tangled with the life of a billionaire whose world ran on influence and power she could never comprehend. Yet even as she convinced herself of this, her fingers brushed the inside pocket of her notebook where she had carefully tucked away the black card he had given her, as though it were something far more fragile than paper. She dressed in her best outfit, a simple cream blouse, black trousers, and the worn blazer she had bought 5 years ago for her teaching interviews. She brushed her hair, tied it neatly, and tried to present herself as someone confident, someone worthy of trust, someone who could lead a school regardless of her limited funds. Her reflection in the mirror looked tired but determined, a woman who refused to let fear deter her from fighting for what she believed in. With one final breath, she gathered her materials and headed into the cold London morning, her nerves rattling like loose threads beneath her calm exterior. The foundation's headquarters was a towering building made of glass and steel, reflecting the gray sky above. The lobby was intimidating. Sleek marble floors, towering plants, efficient receptionists with clipped accents, and a steady stream of suits and executives moving with purpose. Arya felt distinctly out of place as she entered, clutching her laptop bag like a lifeline. When she checked in at the reception, the woman gave her a polite but slightly puzzled look, as though wondering what someone dressed as plainly as Arya was doing in a building where luxury seemed woven into the air. But Arya stood tall, signed her name, and walked toward the elevators, reminding herself that her worth wasn't sewn into her clothes, but into the work she did every day for her students. The meeting room was large, filled with a long, polished table and high-backed chairs that looked far too intimidating for her liking. 3 board members entered, 2 men in expensive suits, and a woman with sharp eyes and an air of authority that instantly made Arya straighten her posture. She greeted them all politely, offering a genuine smile despite her racing pulse. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Everett, the lead evaluator for the Foundation's educational initiatives.
Dr. Everett's voice was professional and clipped, but not unkind, giving Aria a faint glimmer of hope. After brief introductions, the room settled into a tense quiet, and Aria began her presentation. As she spoke about her school, about the children who walked miles in the cold because they believed in their education, about the students who had fled conflict and now fought for a future in a country that hadn't always welcomed them, about the programs she had built with scraps of funding and fierce determination, a transformation took place inside her. Her nerves melted away, her voice grew steady, her passion igniting as she shared stories of triumph, heartbreak, resilience, and dreams that reached far beyond their classroom walls. She showed photos of her students smiling proudly over simple achievements many took for granted, reading their first book in a new language, solving a difficult equation, planting a tiny garden outside the school where hope took root alongside the flowers. The board members listened with a stoic calm that made it impossible to decipher their thoughts. They rarely interrupted, occasionally took notes, and remained frustratingly unreadable. Aria poured everything she had into her final appeal, her belief that education wasn't charity, but opportunity. The children deserved tools to build futures, regardless of their origins. That her school could change the trajectory of dozens of young lives. When she finished, her voice trembled slightly with emotion she worked hard to hide. She waited, hands clasped, heart pounding, watching their eyes move across her data sheets and proposal documents. Dr. Everett finally spoke. "Miss Sullivan, your passion is commendable, and the work you have done with such limited resources is nothing short of remarkable." Aria's breath hitched with hope, until Dr. Everett continued. "But this foundation prioritizes scalability and measurable large-scale impact. Your program, though meaningful, is small and geographically limited." Aria felt something inside her sink. "Your metrics are impressive," Dr. Everett added, "but not competitive enough against larger proposals we are reviewing. We appreciate your effort, but unfortunately at this time, we cannot commit to funding your initiative." The words pierced her, like physical blows. She tried to remain composed, offering a polite nod even as her dreams fractured quietly inside her. She thanked them sincerely for their time and consideration, but as she gathered her belongings, her hands trembled. She walked out into the hallway, feeling hollow, the weight of disappointment pressing heavy on her chest. She had fought so hard, believed so fiercely, hoped so deeply, and still it hadn't been enough. The elevator doors closed around her, sealing her in a small mirrored box where she could see her grief reflected back at her. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. Not here, not where people wore expensive suits and moved through life with ease she had never known. Stepping out of the building into the biting wind, Aria wrapped her arms around herself and walked aimlessly through the bustling London streets. People brushed past her, lost in their own worlds, unaware of the quiet devastation in hers. She reached a small park near the river, sat on a bench, and stared blankly at the rippling water. She felt like a failure, not for herself, but for the children who believed in her, who trusted her to fight for their future. She didn't know how to tell them that once again, the world had told them no. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. When she pulled it out and saw Mason's name flashing on the screen, her heart twisted violently. She hesitated, unsure if she could handle hearing his voice when she felt so raw, but her thumb moved before she could stop it, answering the call. "Aria," Mason said immediately, his voice smoother than she remembered, but tense, like he had been waiting for her all day. "How did your meeting go?" She closed her eyes, her voice breaking despite her attempts to steady it. "Not well," she admitted, forcing the words through her tight throat. "They said no." Mason didn't respond with the usual platitudes people offered in moments of disappointment. Instead, he inhaled, slowly, deeply, as if absorbing the weight of her pain. "Where are you?" he asked quietly, not commanding, but concerned. She glanced around the park. "Near the river. I needed some air." There was a pause, followed by a shift in his tone. A tone she couldn't fully decipher but felt deep in her spine. "Stay there," he said. "I'm coming." Her heart lurched, Mason, no, you don't need to. She cut him off with a softness that left no room for argument. Arya, just stay. She lowered the phone, staring at the screen, bewildered. How? He didn't even know which part of the city she was in. How could he reach her so quickly? Was this normal in his world? To move through cities like they were maps he controlled? 15 minutes later, a black car pulled up near the park. The door opened, and Mason stepped out, his presence altering the air around him instantly. He wasn't dressed in a suit this time, but in a dark coat and dress shirt, softer but still impossibly refined. His eyes searched for her, and when he saw her sitting small and fragile on the bench, something tightened in his expression, a flash of emotion so raw that she felt it in her chest. He walked toward her with controlled urgency, each step carrying a storm she couldn't decipher. When he reached her, he didn't speak first. He simply looked at her, really looked at her, with a mixture of concern, anger on her behalf, and something else she dared not name. She opened her mouth to explain, but he sat beside her and gently took her chilled hands into his warm ones, his touch grounding her in an instant. He didn't ask for details. He didn't demand explanations. He simply held her hands, as though anchoring her to something solid, while the rest of her world shook apart. "Tell me," he said softly, and the tenderness in his voice undid her completely. She took a shaky breath and recounted everything, the questions, the polite rejection, the empty promises, the crushing disappointment. Mason listened in silence, his grip tightening slightly at certain points, his jaw clenching whenever she mentioned their dismissive comments. When she finished, he exhaled slowly, a deep, controlled breath that hinted at simmering anger under the surface. "You deserved better," he said quietly. "Your work deserved better." She shook her head. "Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't what they wanted." "Arya," he said, his voice low and unwavering, "don't ever say that again." His intensity startled her, but there was no cruelty in it, only conviction. "You stood in front of people who evaluate numbers for a living, not lives. They don't see what you see. They don't feel what you feel. That doesn't make you less worthy. It makes them blind."
The world behind his name. Night settled over London like a velvet curtain, soft and shimmering with the hum of city lights. But inside Arya's small hotel room, the silence pulsed with the weight of everything she had felt that day. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her knees drawn close, the black business card lying face up on the blanket like an invitation she wasn't sure she had the right to accept. Mason Caldwell. She whispered his name under her breath, tasting it, testing it, trying to understand how someone like him had walked into her life with the force of a storm and the tenderness of a man who had once been broken and rebuilt himself into iron. She wasn't the type to lose herself in thoughts of any man, but Mason was different, dangerously different. He was a paradox wrapped in silence and sharp edges, someone who moved through the world as though he were built from both power and vulnerability. And now, he had shown up at a park, just because she sounded sad. No man had ever done that for her. No one had ever looked at her the way he did, as if her dreams were not small, as if her failures did not define her, as if she mattered in ways she had never allowed herself to believe. She lifted the card again, her fingers trembling at the thought of calling him. She knew exactly what would happen if she dialed that number. She would be stepping across a line she couldn't retreat from. She wasn't naive. Men like Mason didn't drift into the lives of women like her without consequences. He belonged to a world where power was a language, where decisions echoed across industries, where relationships were dissected by media and investors alike. And she taught children to read and rationed her salary to keep her school running. Their worlds didn't simply differ, they contradicted each other. Her phone screen lit up suddenly with an incoming call. Mason. Her breath froze, her heart thundering so loudly she could barely hear the soft vibration. Without giving herself time to overthink, she answered. "Arya!" His voice spilled through the speaker like warm silk, threaded with exhaustion and tension, as though he had spent the whole day fighting storms only he could see. "I was hoping you'd pick up." I swallowed hard, trying to sound composed. I wasn't sure if I should. "Why wouldn't you?" he asked, his tone gentle but tinged with something deeper, something like longing.
She hesitated, unable to put words to the swirl of emotions inside her. Because your life seems complicated, and mine, it isn't. Mason was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words with care. Then he exhaled softly. Arya, everything about today felt complicated except you. The admission stunned her, warming her chest in a way she didn't know how to handle. He continued, I'm sorry I had to leave so abruptly. I hate that it happened that way. But I meant what I said. I want to see you again. Her breath hitched. Why? She whispered, terrified of the answer. Mason paused, a silence heavy and intimate. Because when I'm with you, things feel clearer, simpler, real. And then after a beat, he added quietly, and that's rare in my world. Arya felt her heart soften, even as fear tightened its grip around it. She didn't know how to navigate someone like him. She didn't know how to protect herself from the inevitable hurt that came with stepping into a life she didn't belong in. But she also knew she couldn't walk away from the pull she felt toward him, not when it tugged at her ribs with a force that felt almost fated. Where are you? He asked, his tone shifting to something warmer, something coaxing. She glanced around her small room. Still at the hotel. Good, he murmured, because I'm already downstairs. Her entire body went still. What? Mason, what? Why? I needed to see you, he said simply. I need to explain things in person. Her mind spun, panic flickering through her veins. She wasn't dressed nicely, her hair was messy from hours of stress, and she had barely regained her composure from earlier. You're here? She whispered, still unable to believe it. Arya, he said gently, open the door. Her legs moved before her brain could catch up. She walked down the narrow hallway of her hotel, heart thundering so loudly she worried other guests might hear it. When she reached the main lobby, she felt her breath leave her entirely. Mason stood waiting near the entrance, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his posture tall and striking against the dull surroundings of the modest hotel. The moment he saw her, something in his expression softened, something she had only glimpsed earlier in the park. He walked towards her with slow, deliberate steps, as though he were approaching something precious. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, her pulse frantic. When he reached her, he didn't touch her immediately. He simply looked at her, his eyes drinking her in as though imprinting every detail. You came here, she whispered, still in disbelief. He nodded. Of course I did. She swallowed. Why? Because I couldn't let you sit alone with what happened today, and because there's something you deserve to know before we take another step forward. She stiffened, bracing for something painful. What is it? He motioned towards a quiet seating area near the windows. They sat across from each other, but he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on her with startling intensity. Arya, my life is not normal. You saw a glimpse of it today with the security. You felt a hint of it when people recognized me at the airport, but there's more you don't know. She listened silently, her heartbeat echoing the tension in his voice. I didn't tell you who I was on the plane because... He paused, searching for the right words. Because I liked the way you looked at me, without judgment, without expectation, without fear. That doesn't happen to me anymore. His voice softened with raw honesty. People want things from me. Access, influence, partnership, money. I live in a world where trust is a currency and everyone has a price. He lifted his gaze to hers. But you didn't want anything from me, except someone to sit beside you and help you breathe. And it felt, he tightened his jaw briefly, it felt like the first real moment I've had in years. Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to men showing vulnerability, especially men like Mason Caldwell. She searched his face, seeing beyond the power and confidence into the wounded quiet hiding beneath. Mason, she said softly, I didn't know who you were. I still don't fully know, but I know you weren't pretending with me. He nodded slowly, his eyes glimmering with something she couldn't fully decipher. Gratitude, maybe? Or fear? You're right, he said. I wasn't. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. But the truth is, the world I come from will not be kind to someone like you. She stiffened at that, the words cutting deeper than he intended. Someone like me? His expression softened instantly, regret shadowing his features.
Arya, I didn't mean anything about your worth or your life. I meant that the people around me, my board, my partners, the press, they dissect everything, everyone, and they will try to turn you into something you're not. His voice grew darker, edged with something protective, and I won't let them. Her heart trembled. Why would they care about me? He gave a faint, sad smile. Because whether you realize it or not, you've already become important to me. The confession hung in the air, fragile and electric. Arya looked down at her hands, trying to steady her breathing. Mason, this is too fast, she whispered. We barely know each other. I know, he said softly, and I don't expect anything from you. I needed you to know how I feel. And I needed you to understand that if you let me in, I will protect you and everything you care about. Then he added quietly, especially your school. Her stomach twisted, suspicion and fear clashing violently, with yearning. No, she said sharply, please don't do that. Don't try to fix things for me. I don't want to become someone you rescue. He leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. I'm not trying to rescue you. I'm trying to stand beside you. She shook her head, her breath trembling. I don't know if I can be in your world. You don't have to be, Mason said softly. You just have to let me into yours. Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, at the quiet desperation in his eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that someone like him could care for someone like her without trying to reshape her life, but doubt still lingered, sharp and heavy. Mason, she whispered, I'm scared. He reached across the small table, taking her hands gently, his touch warm and steady. So am I, he admitted, but I'm more scared of walking away from something real. Her breath trembled. He squeezed her hands lightly. Tell me what you feel, he murmured. She closed her eyes, her voice barely audible. I feel like if I let myself fall for you, I won't know how to catch myself. Silence wrapped around them. Then Mason whispered, almost reverently, Then let me catch you. Her heart cracked open at those words, trembling with the truth she had tried to deny. She already had.
The choice that defines everything. Morning light seeped through the thin hotel curtains, washing Arya's room in a soft glow that contrasted painfully with the storm swirling inside her chest. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night thinking so deeply and so painfully that her mind felt bruised. Mason's words echoed through her head with relentless clarity. You just have to let me into your world. It sounded so simple, yet it was the most terrifying invitation she had ever received. She had seen glimpses of his life, the bodyguards, the urgency in his phone calls, the sharp way people reacted to him, the weight he carried without complaint. He moved like a man who had been forged in pressure, whose every breath influenced industries, and she had come to London with a single suitcase and a heart full of worry for her school. How could those worlds ever fit together without one devouring the other? She paced the small room, her hands pressed to her temples as though trying to calm the storm within. Her children's faces flashed in her mind, their smiles, their determination, the way they looked at her with trust she had fought so hard to earn. This wasn't about her anymore. It was never just about her. It was about their future. And the harsh truth was that without this funding, without some kind of miracle, she would eventually have to close the doors of the school she had spent years building. The children who needed stability the most would be scattered across a system already stretched thin. Their progress would stall, their hope would dim, and she would forever blame herself. Yet the thought of accepting help from Mason, help that felt tied to feelings she didn't understand, made her stomach twist with dread. A knock sounded at her door. Her heart stopped. She froze in place, breath caught in her throat. She knew who it was before she even opened it. She felt his presence the way she felt approaching storms, quiet, intense, unavoidable. She took one steadying breath and opened the door. Mason stood there in the dim hallway,
his expression sharper than she had ever seen it, eyes shadowed with both exhaustion and something deeper, worry. He looked like he had been awake all night, too. His hair was mussed, his coat thrown on hastily, his jaw unshaven in a way that made him look more human, more undone, more vulnerable. The sight of him, raw, unguarded, sent a tremor through her. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Arya stepped aside to let him in. The room felt absurdly small with him standing in it, like her modest space wasn't meant to contain a man who carried empires on his shoulders. Mason turned to her, his expression shifting between determination and hesitation, as though he wasn't sure how to say what he had come to say. "Arya," he began cautiously, "I know yesterday was overwhelming. And I know what I said, what I feel, may have frightened you." He paused, searching her face. "But I need you to understand something before you make any decisions about us." He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders visible. "I'm not here to take over your life. I'm not here to replace your choices with mine. I'm not here to make you dependent on me." She nodded slowly, her heart thudding, her voice barely a whisper. "Then, why are you here?" "Because I care about you," he said simply. "And you deserve someone who doesn't walk away when your world gets heavy." Her throat tightened. "Mason, I don't want to be another obligation in your life." "You're not," he said immediately, stepping closer. "You're the only thing I've chosen for myself in a long time." Her breath caught. He lifted a hand as though he wanted to touch her cheek, but stopped just short, hovering in the air, waiting for permission. She didn't move away. Slowly, gently, his palm cupped the side of her face, his touch warm and grounding. "Arya," he said softly, "I grew up with expectations, pressure, responsibilities that I never asked for but had to embrace. My father built an empire and left it on my shoulders the day he died. I've spent years fighting battles no one sees, negotiating deals that decide the future of entire industries. I learned to be strong because I had to be." His voice softened, almost breaking. "But yesterday, when I saw you crying in that park, I realized I'm tired of only being strong. I want to feel something real, something human, something honest. And that's you." Her breath trembled, tears blurring her vision. "Mason, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I fit in your world." "Then we don't go into my world," he whispered. "We build something between us instead." "But my school, my kids, my responsibilities, I can't abandon them. I can't let anything compromise what I'm fighting for." His expression shifted, a flicker of resolve sharpening his features. "I know, and I'm not asking you to do. I would never ask you to choose between me and your purpose. But there's something I need to ask you, something that might help your school, but it has nothing to do with charity or pity." She stiffened. "Mason." He raised a hand gently. "Let me explain, please." She nodded hesitantly. Mason took a breath and stepped back, giving her space while maintaining the intensity of his gaze. Caldwell Global runs dozens of philanthropic initiatives across Europe, programs aimed at supporting innovation, education, refugee integration. Most of the time, the money is wasted on meaningless campaigns because the executives in charge don't actually understand the communities they're trying to help. He paused, his voice steady. "But you do. You understand better than anyone I've ever met." She stared at him, confusion swirling. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he continued, "I want you to lead one of those programs. Not for me, not because of me, but because you are the most qualified person I've ever met to run an initiative that actually matters." Arya stopped hard. "Mason, that's a job," he said firmly.
with full autonomy, complete control, no ties to me, no supervision, no interference. You would have the funding you need to save your school and expand it if you want to. You would have the reach to help more children than you ever thought possible. Then he added quietly, and you would never have to worry about your school closing again. She shook her head, stepping back, overwhelmed. It looks like a lifeline, but Mason, this is your company. This is your world. I'd be stepping into something huge, something far more complicated than teaching. He nodded. Yes, it is complicated, but it is also meaningful. And you would be incredible at it. His voice softened. It's not charity. It's not pity. It's partnership. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the hurricane inside her. I don't want people to think I got it because of whatever this is between us. I'll make sure no one knows, he said quickly. Your name will stand alone, your qualifications alone. I don't mix business with personal matters, ever. You'd be the first exception, and only because you're the perfect person for the role. She bit her lip hard, torn between fear and hope. And what if we don't work out? She whispered. What then? Would my job disappear? Would everything collapse again? Mason stepped close, his voice low and steady. No, he said firmly, because I will never weaponize your dreams. Not against you, not for you, not for anyone. His eyes softened. Your dreams belong to you, not me. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Arya whispered, I don't want to lose myself. He nodded gently. Then don't. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to let yourself step into something bigger without believing you don't deserve it. His voice dropped. And to stop assuming that your goodness is smaller than my world. A tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it softly with his thumb. Arya, he murmured, I'm falling in love with you, and I'm not scared to admit it anymore. Her breath shattered, and she trembled under the weight of those words. No one had ever said something so terrifying and beautiful to her. Not like this, not with this kind of sincerity. Mason, she whispered, her voice barely holding, I'm falling in love with you too, and that scares me more than anything. His breath hitched, his eyes softening with an emotion so raw it nearly undid her. Then, he whispered, let's be scared together. He stepped closer, his forehead gently touching hers, their breaths mingling in the stillness. His hands cupped her jaw, hers slid to his chest, and for a moment the world melted.